Welcome to Category Visionaries, the show dedicated to exploring exciting visions for the future from the founders who are on the front lines building it. In each episode, we'll speak with a visionary founder who's building a new category or reimagining an existing one. We'll learn about the problem they solve, how their technology works, and unpack their vision for the future. I'm your host, Brett Stapper, CEO of Frontlines Media. Now let's dive right into today's episode. Hey, founders, and thank you for listening. Today, I'm speaking with Thibault, CEO and founder of Vianova, a mobility intelligence platform that's raised $8.8 million in funding. Thibault, thanks for chatting with me today.
Thank you for having me.
Not a problem. So to kick things off, can we just start with a quick summary of who you are and a bit more about your background?
Yeah, so my name is Thibault Castagne. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Vianova. It's a 4.5 years old mobility data analytics startup. Originally, I was working in finance. So I studied mathematical finance in France and then in the US at the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign. So studied as a quant analyst and then trader in London, then work in a hedge fund in Switzerland, kind of like moved into the sustainable energy investment, and then started my first startup in charging infrastructure, building up and deploying charging infrastructure, and then sort of stopped that and then started Vianova. So somehow like came a long way, but looking back, I guess I can connect the dots as Steve Jobs was mentioning.
As you were going through your finance career, working at this hedge fund in Switzerland, in the back of your head, did you have this master plan that one day you were going to start a company, or where did that idea come from?
No, it went naturally. There was something in me that felt like I was at the wrong place, but I love mathematics. I was always good at it. And I just very much enjoy the idea of working to mathematics and making a lot of money. And this is why basically I started in finance, as simple as that. And when I started actually in 2011, that was still basically where the best brain were going. And so for me, I wanted to have the drive and the learnings of like getting into this environment. But then it kind of like went naturally. And when I moved to Switzerland working in this hedge fund, we had a very large oil position. And some of the founding partners basically decided to hedge that and create like a new fund focusing specifically on renewable energy. And I very much like that. And I then took sort of a journey of almost a year and a half, 2 years to learn everything about that market. And by learning this market, I said like, look, I think I would have much more impact actually going from the investment side to being an operator and an entrepreneur and creating my first company. And so 2017, I started my first startup called Spark Horizon, which was essentially like an advertising sponsored charging infrastructure for electric cars.
What was the outcome of that company, and were you satisfied with that outcome?
Yeah, so I think we started a little too early. So at the time we started, there was not that much investment into electrification. So I think we were probably like 2 to 3 or 4 years too early, I would say. However, like I think for me, there was great learnings. The business model was also quite complex because you had to master the outdoor advertising space. And secondly, you had to master the charging infrastructure space. So there was one utility and the other one advertising. So that's quite a complicated business model. But I think there was a lot of learnings for me in terms of go-to-market, in terms of studying and analyzing the market well before actually launching a venture and sort of getting into the space of mobility. Yeah. So we finally decided actually to stop the company because we couldn't scale. There was no sort of venture funds that were dedicated to infrastructure. I mean, most of the funds today are dedicated to equity. And so we couldn't really scale it. So we decided to sort of stop that after a year and a half and somehow moved into an accelerator program. And from that, met a lot of the mobility guru from Europe and US and got very much inspired. And we started Vianova from that.
When it comes to your inspiration, who is the most inspirational founder that comes to mind?
I think Brian Chesky from Airbnb is one of the one I look up to, because I think that's, like the difference between being the missionary versus the mercenary. And I think he is very much of a missionary. I think he made actually like an interview, like in another podcast, which I think he seems very human as a person. And I like that. He seems very human, very approachable, and he really cares. I think for the people he serves, for the company, he really cares for his employees. Looking at how he handled also COVID and let him go a good proportion of the the employees at Airbnb. I think that I look up to him, and clearly like he's an inspiration. Yes.
Yeah, he's an incredible founder. I find it fascinating that he's still so engaged and cares so much about customer
Yes.
feedback. I'm sure every CEO out there would tell you, oh, customers are everything. But then you go and it's like a bullshit experience and it's awful. So they're not really being truthful. Airbnb, I think they have their issues, but from what I've seen on Twitter, like Brian is listening and he's actively pushing out things to make
Yeah.
it better. And he really does care. And I think that's very rare for a CEO to truly actually care like that.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I can give you an anecdote of me actually meeting the number 3 of Microsoft in Paris, and I was amazed. Actually, that was when I was building Spark Horizon. I was amazed how much energy he spent convincing me basically to use Azure as a cloud provider for Spark Horizon, which was like a 6-7 people startup, and the care that he had, like as a leader, basically, like you're the first salesman. You're the first salesman, and you're the first person to basically care about customer feedback, and that energy and the care that he had for me was very inspiring. And I try to apply that all the time, not to be too far from operations, make sure that I still get my hands dirty and I understand, client issues and be the first salesman of the company.
What about books? When it comes to books, and the way we like to frame this, we got this from an author named Ryan Holiday. He calls them quick books. So a quick book is a book that like rocks you to your core, influences how you think about the world and how you approach life. Do any quick books come to mind for you?
Yes. So the one that I actually just finished reading, that I like the depth of the concepts in this book. So the title actually sounds quite shallow. So the title is The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And reading the title, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, you could think that it's quite a shallow, and you're going to get like very basic sort of concepts about, waking up early in the morning or whatever. But the concepts are very deep, basically, about how you should actually lead your life and how you should lead your professional life, but also any other things, basically, that is around you as a human being. And I like 2 concepts specifically there. I think the idea of having a personal mission statement. And I think it's very important for people to craft and write and change and iterate on what is their personal vision statement, what is their constitution, or what will make them who they want to be. And always reflect that to, what are my life priorities? Come back to this personal mission statement. What are my life priorities? What should I really prioritize in my life to achieve and be according to these values and principles that I have in my personal mission statement? And the second concept that I really like is the P2PC balance. So production to production capability. And I think as founder, we always have this issue. And that was one of my big mistakes actually when I started Spark Horizon, that I had this feeling of emptiness, when I moved from being an employee or being at the hedge fund and then starting my own company. I had this feeling of emptiness, and I just jumped straight into the startup and worked super hard every day, every weekend. And I had, I think it was just unhappy, and I was unhappy, and honestly, and I think if you're an unhappy founder, you are not an effective and efficient founder. So the P2PC balance makes sure that indeed you have to produce results, but you also have to take care of your production capability. So making sure that you have a balanced life, the relationships, sports, keep learning even outside of your professional life, having other objectives. I think that makes you more balanced, and certainly also maybe more balanced emotionally, so you can actually like handle the sort of the rock and roll life of being a founder and all the difficult like sort of emotional swings that you can have.
Yeah, that's one of those classic books. I think I probably read that like 10 or 15 years ago. And as you were talking, I looked up when it was written, and it was 1989, which is so funny to think about. I feel like a title like that was probably so novel and so new that I could see why people just couldn't resist buying it. Now that's the title of like 50 million blogs, and like it's kind of been like destroyed now by these like catchy things on social media, but it's a great book and a really great read.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, I love that.
What's your personal mission statement?
Well, I have an urge basically, and I don't know where that come from, like an imbalance in me originally, I don't know, but I have an urge basically to make an impact, and also almost to be recognized for making this impact. So there's probably an ego element in it, but I have this urge of making an impact to the world, and I choose basically sustainability and climate action, because I think this is, I always say there is no planet B. We can also like spend a lot of money basically to go to Mars or any other planets, but we should just take care of the planet we have today and live in harmony with it, as opposed to living in conflict with the nature. And I think for me, that's really what drives me in life. But having said that, like, I think I would balance that sort of personal mission by having a balanced life with things that feed my energy. And I think, that's one of the advice that we give to founders is making sure that you give a lot of energy away, but you need to make sure that you also find the time to retrieve energy. And for me, that is a lot of outdoor activities, a lot of sports, relationship, friends. That is core in my life. And I always take the time basically to prioritize them to make sure that that sort of positive energy comes to me and I replenish myself with that.
Wow, super cool. Let's switch gears now. Let's dive a bit deeper into the company. So how we like to start off this question is really focusing on the problem. So what problem does Vianova solve?
The transportation system today is inherently broken. Transportation as a whole represents about a third of greenhouse gas emissions. And it's key for us to electrify, automate, and generally basically improve the transportation system so that we can lower emissions and achieve this carbon neutrality. And the second part of it, why transportation is broken, is that even in the 21st century, with all the technology that we have, fatalities have increased by 18%, road fatalities have increased by 18% in the last 4 years in the US. So you've got the first economy in the world that essentially basically is producing more and more deaths year after year through road transportation. And I think that those two elements basically are the core challenges that we want to solve at Vianova.
Super interesting. Can you tell us about your customers and the types of companies that are using the platform and working with you?
Yes. So Vianova is a bit special in a way that our main customers are actually government entities, cities and municipalities. So we work today with a bit more than 60 transport authorities and cities across Europe, the Middle East, and the US. So in the US, we work with Culver City. In Europe, we work, for instance, with Paris, London, Transport for London, Amsterdam, Zurich, Helsinki, Oslo. So all these sort of tier 1 to tier 2 or even tier 3 cities are customers of Vianova. We also work with national government. All these represent about 2/3 of our turnover. And the last third of the turnover, which we call enterprise or B2B enterprise, are the fleets, mobility operators, navigation systems, infrastructure managers such as airports or port authorities. So those ones are basically the sort of the B2B enterprise sector that we are expanding more and more now.
This show is brought to you by Frontlines Media, a podcast production studio that helps B2B founders launch, manage, and grow their own podcast. Now, if you're a founder, you may be thinking, I don't have time to host a podcast. I've got a company to build. Well, that's exactly what we built our service to do. You show up and host, and we handle literally everything else. To set up a call to discuss launching your own podcast, visit frontlines.io/podcast. Now, back to today's episode. What's it like selling to a city? I can't imagine that they're short sales cycles. I imagine they're very long sales cycles, but what's it like? What's the inside story there?
Yeah, it's a challenge. Yeah. So it's a challenge, but it's also a moat. It's also a USP. So that means it's difficult to replicate for other companies if they don't have the sales playbook, if they don't have the contact, if they don't have the channel of distribution that are linked basically to business, to government. So, I mean, what is it like? It's a lot of field sales, a lot of thought leadership events to meet basically the right people, influencing them. Essentially, like at Vianova, what we say is that we're creating a market, we're shaping our market. So it's very important for us to build a lot of content. And indeed, as you mentioned, like the sales cycles are fairly long. I mean, we actually did manage we started around 9 to 10 months sales cycle, and now we're below 5 months sales cycle. So it's pretty good. Like we have an average ticket or our annual contract value, average contract value is on 30K euros now. We have less than 5 months sales cycle. So we've really managed to optimize our sales and by building the right playbook with this kind of entities. Yeah.
How'd you do that? How'd you optimize sales?
Very iterative. First of all, we've created a sales playbook that essentially guides all our sales and AE to understand the different processes, basically the different steps of the process to sell for business to government. But the real hack that we had, generally pilot and POC works very well. So pilot POC, it's a very good way actually by entering the door of these cities and government, which also actually work very well with Fortune 500 type of companies. So you do a POC, you do a pilot, you're already in the door, you can actually sign for a small ticket like 20 or 30K. And then basically you get a larger contract either because there is an RFP. And then, in some effects, you have very good chance actually to draft the RFP actually with your client, or because you just found like, let's say the right sort of innovation budget or direct awards that you can work with. So POC pilot has been one of them. Generally, like in terms of acquisition, we've reduced a lot. We've been much better actually at the outbound campaigns. So we've really created like this sort of SDR role at Vianova, and how do we create those very good messaging so we have a high response rate and conversion afterwards. So that was like, let's say, our trick to not only actually like reduce the first part of the funnel, but also like accelerate also the mid to end of the funnel.
What about finding product market fit? What was that journey like? Did you feel like you had it right away, or was that war and a lot of battles to get to this point?
So the first ever pilot that we did was actually with Paris. So Paris, end of 2018, beginning of 2019, there were 35,000 e-scooter and e-bikes free floating. So that was a huge mess. And we actually went through a city challenge that was essentially the goal. The challenge was building or a network of drop-off zones and managing these drop-off zones and charging operators actually for parking their vehicle in these drop-off zones. So we started like that with this first pilot, and that really drew the reference. We started like at the beginning, we were scrapping the data from the Lime, the Bird, the Void, the Spin of this world. And that real market cases and pilots really helped us find this product market by, iteratively basically like working on the product, but also like I have to say that I spent a year and a half every week meeting new clients face-to-face or new prospect face-to-face. So I was literally like I was couch surfing for a year and a half, for 18 months to 24 months. I was couch surfing, I had my bike, and I was like meeting every week a new city, a new like regional entity, and basically pitching Vianova, getting some feedback, working directly with the product team and improving iteratively that product, improving our messaging and building the sort of the first layer of customers that are still following us now afterwards. Yeah.
Brian Chesky is another infamous founder who went couch surfing, I think, in the early days. So I can see the inspiration there.
Yeah, exactly.
How'd you get the city of Paris to give you a shot? You're a young entrepreneur, you come to them, say you have this big idea. Like, how do you get Paris to say yes? And the reason I ask, that's something that all entrepreneurs struggle with, is getting people to give you a chance. What did you do to get them to give you a chance?
So you have to make it easy to say yes. The truth is that I believe like in these large entities, sometimes there is more to lose for them to actually like acquire your software than actually not acquiring, because not acquiring it means that they actually won't answer any sort of questions about why they did acquire it, how to follow, like what is the workload that maybe will go with the first onboarding, et cetera, et cetera. So you have to make it easy to say yes. And so this is the first part, making it easy for them to say yes means, again, like working with POC, with pilots. So relatively small budget, easy to implement, easy to showcase quickly some value. I think this is number one. Number two, and that comes actually as branding and marketing, which is at the beginning a bit hard, I have to say, but building that sort of thought leadership that you can create on content. So having this content, basically, that the types of, sort of account-based marketing and providing this content basically to these key prospects help a lot basically for them to easily, to say yes to your product, because they can see, first of all, that it's easy actually to start implementation. And second of all, that you seem to be an expert in this field and they have to trust you with your product.
What about fundraising? So as I mentioned there in the intro, you've raised 8.8 million to date. What have you learned about fundraising throughout this journey?
So fundraising, first of all, like it's very time consuming. So I think as a CEO, you have to dedicate probably 50% of your time for the next 6 months of fundraising. So I think you have to be aware of that. And so that means like, from the first meeting that you're going to get basically to the closing and getting the money in the bank, it will actually take 6 months. So you really have to be ready for that. You have to be ready for the due diligence, which will take a lot of time. which they will ask a lot of hard questions. So it will be stressful during that time. And so what I've learned is making sure that you can delegate before you actually do your fundraising. So as much as possible, delegate so that basically the business doesn't have so much of an impact when you go fundraising. This is number one. Number two, I think you have to manage what you say well to investors in a way that first, don't look desperate, that's for sure, but you have to create basically this sort of competition. You have to cook, let's say you have to steer this mayonnaise between the different investors and make sure that there's an excitement going on. And at the end, like investors follow investors. And so if they feel like there is an interest, if they feel like this train is about to leave, then they will jump on the train. And as soon as you have one to jump on the train, they will all follow. So what you need to get is making sure that you have one that actually jump in the train first. So you really have to manage well the communication that you do so that you basically build that excitement and really parallelize as much as possible, basically your discussion, so that you can also make that competition happen and reduce also the time to do your fundraising. As you can imagine, for us, for business to government startup, it was not the easiest type of company to raise funding for, even though like we've grown more than 100% every year, like for the last 4 years in terms of revenue, but they still this bias and thinking, okay, like business to government, for me, I will pass that. So yeah, that's the second one. And second tip and third tip, invest a lot in branding. It's also, I think it's very important for VCs that, they look up to your startup. So they want to have like a nice deck. They want to have something that is well designed, so it looks good. They want to hear also good stories out there. So there is already like a certain branding for them to identify and there's a story behind it. I think this is the third one. So it's all the subjectivity into the investment that you have to win over.
Outside of fundraising, let's imagine that you were told you have to start the company again today from scratch. What would be the number one piece of advice you'd give yourself based on everything you've learned so far?
First, number one advice, human relationship is the priority. Basically, like human relationship and the people that you have in your team is the first, I would give myself as like, this is the first thing that you have to cultivate, that you have to improve, and the people that you surround yourself are building the company. And so, as I said, like on my side, like I think, as a CEO founder, you always have like a bit of a mood swing, you're sometimes a bit more stressed, and you can be very direct and transactional in the way that you're also managing the company, and very like with a very low EQ, in managing people. But at the end of the day, what I've realized is, the power that you can have as a CEO and co-founder is how do you motivate your team? And how do you motivate your team, and how do you bring a set of exceptional people together to accomplish this mission? And so the first advice I would give me is that prioritize always human relationship over anything else.
Amazing. Love that advice. Final question for you now before we wrap up here. Let's zoom out 3 to 5 years into the future. What's the big picture vision that you're building?
Yeah, so we see like our vision basically is to become the operating system of the mobility world. So what does it mean? Basically, it means, building basically that sort of platform that will help solve any transportation challenges, from road safety to curbside management to congestion pricing or optimized traffic management, leveraging actually data from connected vehicles and IoT devices. And so that's the way that I see Vianova diversifying basically itself in terms of client verticals. It is a very exciting project that we're doing at the moment, is that we are working actually with cities to provide them with near-miss events. So near-miss events are basically all the near crash that are happening in the city. So having a proactive view on, or proactive vision basically of assessment of road safety by using near misses and being able to almost predict basically where new crashes actually will happen. So we're deploying this actually in the US at the moment with certain transport authorities. And we're also like including that in navigation system. So to give you a bit of a background, like a navigation system today are very much based on, how quick can I go from A to B? And what we see is that, how can we actually improve the navigation system so that on top of actually, going the quickest from A to B, I can be the safest from A to B, and what does that change? When you use your Google map in Waze, basically in LA, for instance, and they tell you to cross basically this 3x3, and you have no traffic lights, you have no visibility, you have nothing, that's so dangerous. And, how do we actually provide our data insights machine to machine in a way that, how Vianova can create this data insights to navigation system or to autonomous vehicle so that basically they can drive in a safer and more sustainable way.
Amazing. Thibault, love the vision, and I really love this conversation. We're going to have to wrap here, but before we do, if there's any founders that are listening in that want to follow along with your journey, where should they go?
They can find us actually on Twitter, on the website with Vianova.io, or they can actually reach out to me directly on LinkedIn with Thibault, Thibault, Castagne, my last name, and send me a message and connect. And I would love to, to have more conversation.
Amazing. Thibault, thanks for taking the time. Really appreciate it.
Cheers. Thank you, Brett.
This episode of Category Visionaries is brought to you by Frontlines Media, Silicon Valley's leading podcast production studio. If you're a B2B founder looking for help launching and growing your own podcast, visit frontlines.io/podcast. And for the latest episode, search for Category Visionaries on your podcast platform of choice. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you on the next episode.